The spell was written to wait longer than its creator ever could etch, not into paper or stone, but into moments that refused to exist until the man who imagined them no longer did. Because in a world where magic answered intention to quickly and power obeyed the living too easily, Edwin Vale chose to design a spell that would only awaken once his heartbeat stopped. A spell immune to ego, impatience, fear, and regret. A spell that could not be altered by second thoughts or undone by weakness. And so while the city watched him grow old as a harmless illusionist who never performed real miracles, Edwin spent decades quietly preparing the greatest act of faith ever attempted by a magician, believing that true magic should belong to those willing to release control entirely. And every morning, he woke knowing none of his work would ever benefit him, knowing that the applause he deserved would echo only in a world where he no longer existed. Yet this knowledge sharpened his resolve rather than dulling it, because Edwin had lived long enough to understand that most spells failed not because they were weak, but because their casters were still alive when they activated, still tempted to steer outcomes, still eager to claim credit, still frightened of consequences. And so he designed a spell that demanded the ultimate price not as a sacrifice, but as a condition, binding its ignition to the irreversible certainty of death. And as he aged, he built it piece by piece through gestures no one noticed, kindnesses no one recorded, small changes woven into the city, as daily rhythm like notes in a melody to quiet to hear until silence followed. And when he healed a cracked bridge, he did it without magic. When he calmed riots, he did it with words. When he saved children from burning homes, he did it with his own failing body. Because the spell he was crafting was not a single action, but a structure. Not a flash, but a foundation encoded into memories, relationships, streets, regrets, and unspoken hopes, all aligned to respond when the final condition was met. And people mocked him for refusing. The grand duels and public feats that defined true magicians, calling him obsolete, cowardly, irrelevant, unaware that his irrelevance was intentional, that anonymity was essential, that the spell required the world to forget him in order to truly receive what he would leave behind. Because a gift tied to a name becomes a monument, but a gift tied to absence becomes inheritance. And so Edwin let history pass him by while he quietly ensured that when he died the city would not mourn a hero, but would awaken to a miracle already in motion. And the night his heart finally failed, it happened without witnesses, no dramatic lightning, no last words whispered to an apprentice, no glowing sigils in the sky. Just an old man sitting alone at a wooden table finishing a letter he would never send, smiling not because he was unafraid of death, but because death had finally agreed to keep its end of the bargain. And as his breath faded, the spell listened for the one signal it had been trained to recognize above all others: the absence of its creator's will, the silence where intention once lived. And only then did it begin, not with explosions or revelations, but with subtle corrections across the city, small injustices gently reversing themselves, lost items reappearing where they were needed most, debts dissolving through improbable opportunities, broken relationships finding closure without explanation, children dreaming of futures they had never been allowed to imagine, and magicians waking to find their most dangerous spells dulled, their power softened, their hunger replaced with restraint. Because Edwin's spell was not designed to grant power, but to redistribute it, to remove magic's tendency toward domination and return it to wonder. And as days passed, the city noticed that suffering no longer compounded, that tragedy still occurred but did not multiply, that pain arrived without cruelty attached, that systems designed to exploit quietly lost efficiency, that weapons failed more often than they fired, that lies felt heavier to speak, that truth traveled faster than fear, and scholars searched for causes while priests argued over prophecy and mages panicked at the realization that something had altered the rules without asking permission, none of them suspecting the quiet old man whose name was already fading from memory. And the spell continued to unfold like a long breath finally released, because it had been written with patience only the dead could afford, unfolding across months and years, correcting course rather than commanding it, healing without erasing scars, allowing grief to exist while preventing it from poisoning the future. And when at last someone found Edwin's abandoned workshop, they discovered no spell circle, no grimoire, no instructions, only a single unfinished letter whose final line ended mid-sentence. And in that silence, they finally understood the truth of his greatest trick, that the spell was never meant to be understood, never meant to be replicated, never meant to be thanked, because its power came from the one thing no living magician could truly offer: the willingness to let go completely, to trust the world without supervision, to believe that goodness did not require constant control, and so the city changed without ever knowing exactly why. And generations later, children would ask why their world felt slightly kinder than the story suggested it should be, why cruelty seemed harder to sustain, why hope arrived even when no one summoned it, and no one would have an answer. Because the man who planned it had made sure the spell left no signature, only results, proving at last that the most powerful magic is not the one that announces itself in life, but the one that waits patiently until its creator is gone, and then quietly makes the world better without asking to be remembered.